and gentlemen, the books is in. The books are in. Yep. They in. They're here. ETM Hotel, Rennie Sean. Welcome and peace. My name is Sean. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in to the broadcast today. For those who may catch it on the replay, appreciate the view. Make sure you like the show, share the show. I'm not going to be on too long. I do want to share some information with everybody. This seems to be either on the fence or, racially motivated to say white man this, white man that. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to introduce you, which you should already be familiar with, but I'm going to introduce you to the blackdoctors.org. I'm not going to make it long. I'm not going to try to confuse anyone or anything like that. I just want to get straight to the point because these are the doctors that are in the field, having the conversations, doing what need to be done, talking about COVID, trying to educate people, but they really ain't being heard too much. They really ain't being heard too much. So again, like the show, share the show. I know Brother Garfield is live right now, and that's more interesting to talk about some fake Hebrews claiming to be in West Africa. So, like I said, let me introduce you to the Black Doctors. All right. So I'm gonna play the little video right here. Hopefully, I don't get no copyrights and nothing like that, because I'm only trying to do this in the interest of the people, educating people on COVID vaccinations, giving them more informed information so that they can make a better decision when it's their time to, when they are eligible to receive the vaccine or not. So, play this video right here.
I'm seeing everything. Whole families of people where mom, grandma, kids, everyone's positive. Police officers coming, needing to get tested that can't get tests at work. There's a huge need for us here. We are at one of the harder hit zip codes in Philadelphia, where there are more African Americans with coronavirus disease and death. Think about how to use your skills and your talent to impact a community. And that's what we did. Once we decided we were going to do it, it took 48 hours to get out in the street and test people. All right, good morning. I'm the surgeon and director. I want them all to watch my technique. So who wants to go first? It was reported that more African Americans were dying than other groups in the city. But the tests are not in our community and they're not easily accessible. There were so many barriers. And in seeing that, there was no way to really reduce the incidence of disease and death without testing people. And once I saw the city was not doing that broadly, that's how this consortium came to be. So then I just started going down the list. Okay, I have some testing kits in my office. My colleagues have testing kits. So I drove around the neighborhood and picked them up. And then we had a Zoom call with 30 healthcare professionals just to say who's available, who's comfortable testing, who's not comfortable testing. I reached back out to the city and I said, I need the zip codes where the majority of people are being diagnosed and dying. And then I reached out to my pastor and said, could you identify a church in each one of these zip codes where we could use the parking lot? We went from doing 10 to 20 tests a day to 350, almost 400. Today, we'll probably do 250 to 300, but that's only because we don't have any more testing kits. Come on, we're gonna do it together.
Okay, deep breath, deep breath, deep breath, deep breath, deep breath. Oh,
That's it. You're done. You're done. After folks are tested, they can be treated. They can be isolated. They can reach out to all the people they've been in contact with and quarantine. We don't want this to just be a Band-Aid. We want to help them establish care with some providers that will care about and be empathetic to their cause. The whole health disparity, a portion of it is who is providing your care. Is it someone who is empathetic to you? It is someone who knows your struggle. And oftentimes it is people of color, doctors of color, taking care of people of color. The only limiting factor we have is supplies. And it's great that the students are volunteering, but eventually they're going to have to get back to their work. So financial support from the city, from the state, from the federal government would go a long way. But I don't have any of that now. There needs to be an office whose responsibility is not just when there's a crisis, but every day to handle something like this.
All right, so yeah, Black Docs. All right, so here's the Black Doctors mission. Okay. Mission is simple: education and advocacy for African Americans to reduce the incidence of disease and death from coronavirus. African Americans are being diagnosed at a disproportionately higher rate than other groups and are dying from coronavirus at a higher rate than other groups. To address that need, Black Doctors COVID-19 Consultorium was born. We have built the mobile COVID-19 testing operation. Our goal with the mobile unit is to provide testing alternative that is barrier-free to test for coronavirus disease in our hardest hit areas of Southern Pennsylvania. So y'all should be familiar with this system, right? Showed y'all heard this before, but this is the actual website. Remember, what I'm doing today is about Black doctors. I'm gonna put this in the chat for people who want to go and visit. And peace to everybody, Nunu, Rosti from West Africa, Keisha, Chavis, and others who may not even comment or anything like that. All right, so you got your gallery, you got your news, you got everything right here. Now let me get to the meat and potatoes.
Hello and good evening. My name is Dr. Reed Tuckson, a founding member of the Black Coalition Against COVID, and I want to thank you, each and every one of you, for joining us in this very special town hall. These are perilous times for our nation and for the Black community. We are confronted by the interrelated perils of an unstable government and a national political agenda that is out of control. But we're also confronted by the rapidly escalating and changing threats from the COVID-19 pandemic. While the disgusting events of last night are dominating the news cycle, let us not forget that yesterday was the deadliest day of this pandemic. Let us remember in our hearts the 3,915 people who died yesterday, and the more than 360,000 who have died overall, and the 132,000 people who are battling for their lives tonight in our nation hospitals. And because the Black Coalition Against COVID has a significant membership of Black health professionals, let us also keep in our hearts the brave men and women who are providing care on the front lines and who are cleaning and keeping our hospitals safe so that patients can be treated. These times screen out for the collective competencies, the collective capabilities, and the assets of a united Black community. This is why we at the Black Coalition Against COVID are energized by the extraordinary collaboration that we have received from our leading faith, social, and political organizations. The members of the Black Coalition Against COVID's Health Coalition are our 4 historically Black medical schools: Howard University, Meharry, Morehouse, and the Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science. We also have the National Medical Association, the W. Montague Cobb Institute, and the National Black Nurses Association. Also the National Urban League and blackdoctor.org. Together, we have produced several Making It Plain town halls for the Black community, for minority health professionals, and for the Black media. Tonight, our coalition is joined by the sponsorship of leading Black faith initiatives, including the Black Idea Coalition, led by Reverend Matthew Watley, the Choose Healthy Life Black Clergy Action Plan, co-chaired by Reverends Sharpton and Calvin Butts, whom we will hear from later, Rainbow Push and Jesse Jackson, the AME Council of Bishops. We're also especially pleased that we are joined tonight by the fraternal and social organizations that comprise so much of the life of Black America. 100 Black Men of America, National Coalition of 100 Black Women, the National Panhellenic Council, which includes Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity, Alpha Kappa Psi, Omega Psi Phi, Delta Sigma Theta, Phi Beta Sigma, Zeta Phi Beta, Sigma Gamma Rho, and Iota Phi Theta. We're also joined by the Links Incorporated, the National Council of Negro Women, and the Council on Black Health. And finally, we are also joined tonight in sponsorship of this town hall by the NAACP and the City of Chicago. I also want to thank our sponsor, Anthem, for their generous educational grant, and the company Henry Schein for their ongoing support of the Black Coalition Against COVID. Finally, I want to thank the extraordinary array of experts who are joining us tonight to answer your questions. We've already received quite a number of them prior to the broadcast, and we will address each of them as the program unfolds. I urge you to put your questions in the chat room, and we have staff, Dr. Melissa Clark, monitor them in real time. Tonight, we have an ambitious agenda, and we'll move rapidly through your questions. So keep your pencils handy, but also know that the blackdoctor.org website, blackdoctor.org, will re-air the program at 10 o'clock tomorrow. And next week, you can find it on the Black Coalition Against COVID's website, blackcoalitionagainstcovid.org. We'll put that in the chat room. Tonight, we will address your questions that you've already, many of you have sent in, on topics that include updates on the virus, its mutation, and what you need to know, and what those mutations mean to you. What are the vaccines? How do they work? How were they developed so quickly? And whether people with specific health conditions should take them or not. How vaccines were approved, and if they are safe, and whether or not we as people of color can have confidence in the process. How they will be disseminated, and how your community can be assured that there is equity and fairness in the distribution process. How the faith and other community organizations can help mitigate some of the suffering in our community from the socioeconomic consequences of this pandemic. And we will hear from two of the most important members of the incoming Biden-Harris health team as we go forward, and especially hearing from incoming Surgeon General Murthy, and also the senior leader for health equity for the Biden-Harris team. So let's get right to it. Our first guest is one who is known to all of us, Dr. Anthony Fauci. I'm very pleased that we are now joined with by Dr. Tony Fauci. Dr. Fauci is well known to all of us and someone whom we all have a universal respect and admiration. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Fauci.
Good to be with you, Reed. Thank you for having me.
Great. Listen, our audience is concerned about the growing numbers of infected people and the number of people, especially African Americans, who are dying. Help us to understand where we are in this experience of the pandemic, and what can we expect over the next few months? What do we have to be prepared for?
We're in a very difficult period, Reed, right now. We are at an incline or an inflection curve of cases that unfortunately is worse than we have seen throughout any period of the outbreak. We now have over 350,000 total deaths. We're averaging over 200,000 new infections a day, and between 2,000 and 3,000 deaths per day. Hospitalizations are really reaching the point of stress, with now over 128,000 hospitalizations. The situation could even get worse as we get into the first couple of weeks of January, because we're going to possibly see, I hope not a lot, but it's quite conceivable, we'll see a blip superimposed upon the surge because of the travel and the congregations that take place over the Christmas and New Year's holiday. Unfortunately, African Americans continue to bear a disproportionate burden, both of the infections compared to the demographic distribution in society, as well as for the severity of infections based on hospitalizations per 100,000, as well as deaths per 100,000 related to COVID. So it's a very serious situation for the African American community, which is really the reason why we've got to make sure in two areas. One, an adherence to the public health measures, that we double down. And two, when the vaccines become available to the particular people in the different subgroups, that you make sure you get vaccinated, because that will be the final solution to this, is vaccination together with continuation of public health measures.
Very, very clear. Many of us have noticed in the news reports that there are variants and mutations. Help us to understand what this is all about. What is a variant? Is it different than a mutation? And how concerned should we be about all of this?
Well, mutation and variant are essentially interchangeable. A mutation is a mistake in the coding of the virus as it replicates. That leads to a variant, which means a virus that isn't exactly like the one before the mutation. RNA viruses mutate all the time. That's part of what they do. Most of the time, the mutations are irrelevant. They don't make any functional difference. However, the mutation that has come out of the United Kingdom is in fact one that does have a functional significance. It appears to be, and very likely truly is, more contagious than the virus before the mutation. The Brits were studying this carefully, and we will be studying it very carefully, and are already, that they find that it doesn't increase the risk of serious disease or death, even though it does increase the risk of infection because it transmits much more efficiently, nor does it interfere with the ability of the vaccine to protect you. So we have to keep watching it carefully, Reed, because it could change. So it's something you take very seriously. The best way to counter it is to maintain the public health measures that we talk about. Uniform wearing of masks, avoid close contacts, avoid crowds in congregate settings, and wash your hands as often as you possibly can.
Well, I'm glad you clarified that issue about the mutations and its impact, or in this case, not an impact on whether the vaccines that have been currently approved will still be efficacious. That was a question that our audience did have. Let me turn to another issue regarding the vaccine, and that is that we've noticed that the rollout has been slow. We know that you have nothing to do with that process, but there are many who are talking about that even though our clinical trials have been based upon 2 doses for the 2 vaccines that have now been approved, someone's suggesting we should stretch the supply by giving only 1 dose or cut doses in half. How can you talk to us about that?
Okay, so it depends on the problem that you're trying to solve. If the problem is that you have a lot of people that you want to get vaccinated, but you don't have enough vaccine, then the idea about stretching out so that you don't put aside a second dose, that might address that problem. We don't think it's a good idea, Reed, because the science tells us that the optimal protection is you get a single dose from either Moderna or Pfizer. If you got Moderna, you get the second dose in 28 days. If you got Pfizer, you get the second dose in 21 days. To stretch out and you don't get your second dose to maybe 3 or 4 months, there's no scientific data that proves that. And since we want to maintain our credibility and do things right according to the science, we want to do it exactly the way it was shown in the clinical trial. Regarding half a dose, right now, we don't have a problem that we need more vaccines. We have a problem to got to logistically get the vaccine in the arm of people. So you hear a lot about half dose. You hear a lot about extending 1 dose. Don't be concerned about that. Do what's recommended by the FDA, and that is prime and boost, either 21 days later or 28 days later.
Great. And we will certainly later in the show dig very deeply into the dissemination pathway and what we can do. One of the audience members of our show tonight has previously let us know that they have a family member who has just been admitted into a hospital with kidney disease and other sequelae of the virus infection. And they just feel so hopeless. Dr. Fauci, I just wonder, is there any advice you have to a family member who now has had to admit their family member to a hospital? You can't come and visit. What is a person to do? What does a family do that cares and loves for their loved one?
Well, right now, if the person is in the hospital, Reed, they have to rely on the dedication, which we see how dedicated the physicians and the nurses are, that they're doing everything they can to take care of and get your loved one back out of the hospital. Once you're hospitalized, once you're in a serious situation, you have to admit and be realistic. The situation is serious. But many people who get into the hospital walk out of the hospital and are okay. Certainly, many die also, but you really can't predict. What you've got to do is stay hope, pray for them, support each other, and hopefully the person will be okay.
Well, thank you for that sobering and realistic thought. Final question. Your lab was instrumental in developing the Moderna vaccine with leadership by Dr. Graham and Kizzmeiki Corbett, from whom we will be hearing in a few moments. But one of the other innovations that were developed in your lab is what's referred to as monoclonal antibodies. We're hearing, and our audience has noted, that we're not seeing it used. What about this therapeutic intervention, and should we be advocating for its more frequent use?
The answer is absolutely we should be advocating for its more frequent use. It is best used, Reed, early on in the course of infection because it is an antibody or a protein that's directed against the virus. So the best chance you get of having a positive impact is to give it to someone early when the virus is replicating at a great rate. The issue of not using it as much as we should relies on the fact that it is intravenously given. So you can't just walk into a doctor's office and get a shot or get a pill. So what we need to do is to create the logistical capability of giving it to people as an outpatient before they get into the hospital. But it is a very promising form of therapy.
Well, listen, Dr. Fauci, we know your time is short. We thank you for this. Is there any one last message that you want to leave our audience? We have so many people from the Black community and probably others who are listening very carefully to what they need to know to protect our own lives.
Well, I think what we need to make sure they understand, and I believe so many do, but just to underscore it, that there is light at the end of the tunnel, Reed. As we get vaccines rolled out and implemented month after month after month, we will get back to some form of normality. In the meantime, you must protect yourself by adhering to the public health measures, the mask wearing, the physical distancing, the avoiding congregate settings. It would be a shame if with light at the end of the tunnel that you are one that still gets infected, as we're getting to the point where we'll have major protection of people by the vaccine. So hang in there. This will end. This will not go on forever. It will end. So stay safe. Take care of each other until that time occurs.
Well, thank you so much, Tony. Have a great day and keep doing the good work that you're doing.
Thank you very much, Reed. Always good to be with you.
Take care. Bye-bye. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the president of the Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science, one of our 4 historically Black medical schools, to lead a discussion on what we need to know about the vaccines themselves, the science behind them, and other elements. Dr. Carlisle?
Yes, and thank you very much, Dr. Tuckson. Thank you for the honor and privilege for being here. And I just want to say it's an honor to follow Dr. Anthony Fauci, somebody who's been a hero of mine throughout my career, indeed a legend in this area. And I thank him for his expression of optimism, and we're going to get this done, I agree. So my questions are for Dr. Kizzmeiki Corbett, who's a member of Dr. Fauci's laboratory. Dr. Corbett, you are a viral immunologist at the Vaccine Research Center at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at the National Institute of Health. And we just heard that you were critical to your NIH Institute's coronavirus effort. You are the perfect person to help many in our audience to understand this question. What exactly is a virus, and what makes the COVID-19 virus so dangerous?
Well, first of all, thank you all for inviting me here tonight to talk to you, and also for getting together so many prominent organizations to host this webinar. I think it is very important that in the time that we are in, that we really get the message out as widely and as broadly as possible. And so a virus, what is a virus? It's really interesting to me because one of the things that continues to come up about these mutations is that they're happening over time. And one of the reasons why that is because generally just functionally how a virus works, right? A virus cannot replicate without a host cell. And that is actually why they are so dangerous. So they are these submicroscopic molecules that take up host cells in order to replicate and create daughter viruses and then transmit from person to person, or in some cases, animal to animal. The really interesting thing and what makes COVID-19, the virus that causes COVID-19, so dangerous is firstly that it comes from a family of viruses that are called zoonotic pathogens. So what that means is that they're generally dwelling in animals at all times, and sometimes by way of evolution, they can start to transfer to humans and cause human-to-human transmission. And so that's what you're seeing now. We're seeing this really robust, sustained human-to-human transmission of a virus that actually started in an animal reservoir. And as we continue to allow ourselves around the globe to be hosts, whether it be UK strains or US strains or et cetera, the virus continues to find more efficient ways to transmit from human to human. And that's what Dr. Fauci was talking about in regards to the UK strain, and that's some of the data that's coming out. And so that's really what makes these viruses so quote unquote dangerous.
Let me go on to our next question here, Dr. Corbett. Exactly what is in a vaccine? I've heard from many people, I know there are these concerns out there, that it has something to do with nanotechnology and robots and other bad stuff in there. What exactly is in vaccines?
The two currently available vaccines that have been authorized for emergency use by the FDA are Pfizer's vaccine candidate and also Moderna's vaccine candidate, both of which are messenger RNA vaccines. And the reason why you likely heard about some nanotechnology is because the really cool thing about their technology is that to deliver the messenger RNA, which is simply just a piece of genetic code from coronavirus. It is only encompassing the spike protein, so one particular protein from coronavirus. In order to safely deliver that to the body and target it to the right types of cells so that your body can elicit an immune response, they package it in lipid nanoparticles. So that's basically just a very small ball of fat that is wrapped around the messenger RNA. So that is essentially the totality of the vaccine. The other thing that people have been sometimes concerned about are, for example, carcinogens like formaldehydes or mercury or human cells. None of these very harmful things are in the vaccine. In fact, no preservatives are in these vaccines at all. There are other things in the vaccine, and you can look up these discrete ingredients online, but such as sucrose, which is sugar. So these are very pure compounds that are being delivered to the body and nothing to be of any concern.
And just for the record, to reiterate, no robots, no tracer devices?
No robots or any tracer devices. However, we're all probably on a computer or a cell phone right now. So if you're worried about being traced, then we're probably living in the wrong generation at the wrong time. But no, there are no tracer devices. There are no microchips or anything of that nature that are being delivered with this vaccine. It is solely messenger RNA in a fat molecule, and its sole purpose is to help us to overcome this pandemic by preventing COVID-19 disease.
So speaking about vaccines, can you please explain how there has been such a rapid development of the COVID-19 vaccines? Why should we have confidence in the science if they were produced so quickly at warp speed?
I believe it was Erica Baidu who said, this is my art and I'm sensitive about it, or something like, some quote like that. And that's exactly how I feel when people say, how can we be confident in the science? And it's because I, as a scientific lead for the lab that's under Dr. Fauci's institute, but led by Dr. Barney Graham, have been working on coronavirus vaccine development for the last 6 years. And in that last 6 years, we really have gathered a very fundamental understanding of how to make really good vaccines for coronaviruses. And this started because of the necessity to understand it after coronaviruses continued to cause these very regional outbreaks, such, for example, the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome in 2014, and et cetera. And so we had this fundamental knowledge around coronavirus vaccine development, the protein that the messenger RNA is expressing in your body. We've looked at that protein at atomic level detail in very high definition, understand every nook and cranny of that protein, and also how the body makes antibody responses to that protein. And so in studying that and making vaccines for MERS over the last 6 years, we also partnered with Moderna, which was at the time actually a very small biotech company, but has since then grown to be larger. But they use a platform called messenger RNA. And together with our understanding of how to make spike proteins and their platform messenger RNA, we had this large package of data that really allowed us to drive this rapid vaccine response. So what you're seeing in front of you by way of the media and otherwise is, 10, 11 months of vaccine development. But the preclinical science that drove this vaccine development extends even beyond my tenure at the National Institutes of Health, even up to 10 to 15 years, starting in the days of the SARS coronavirus. So there's a large amount of research and science that backs these vaccines. So that's the first part. And then the second part is that this is the most devastating global health crisis in the last 100 years. And there is likely no other way out of it at this point than a vaccine or some really critical medical intervention. And because of that, there is a necessity. And that necessity was recognized, thankfully, very early on by multiple institutions under the Health and Human Services for the government, whether it be NIH, the FDA, et cetera. And everybody really came together to say, how can we do this quickly without jeopardizing the integrity of the science? And I really like when I follow Dr. Fauci, because he always really states that over and over again, that no matter what we do at any turn, sure, it might be better and more feasible to give out 50 microgram doses rather than 100 microgram doses. But the science has backed this process the entire way. And it started with the preclinical science. The data from the phase 1 clinical trials drove the phase 2 clinical trials, and so forth. And so what you're seeing here is this large amount of organization, a lot of resources, financially and otherwise, put towards this vaccine effort, and absolutely no amount of responsibility or integrity was lost along the way.
Well, Dr. Corbett, one last question. I know that Dr. Fauci spoke to this as well with Dr. Tuckson. How concerned are you with the virus's mutations and their effect on the vaccine that you helped develop?
I, as a viral immunologist, and having, I did my PhD in dengue viruses, and I actually started at the NIAID looking at influenza viruses, which mutate very readily, as we know, as we have to get seasonal influenza vaccines. So when I look at these mutations on a computer screen from the different strains, so to speak, which I actually like to call them genetic variants, I'm not as alarmed as the media would have us think. I agree with Dr. Fauci that what it really takes is us to have fundamental scientific understanding around each of these genetic variations and to test some of the vaccine serum, whether it be from people who got vaccinated in the early trials or from the animals that got vaccine early on. And that is exactly what our team is doing, and those experiments are underway. So the real way to answer these questions is by science. But I'm not necessarily losing that much sleep over the mutations just yet. I believe you're muted, Dr. Cross.
Thank you, Dr. Corbett, and keep up the excellent work that you're doing. We're going to move on to our next panelist, our next guest, and that is Dr. Peter Marks, who is the director of the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research at the Food and Drug Administration. Dr. Marks, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
My pleasure.
In short, you are the person who is responsible for approving new vaccines and drugs, the perfect person to ask this question from our audience. Why should we trust the process used by the FDA to approve these vaccines? What exactly is that process?
So the FDA uses a rigorous process when we go through our applications. And in fact, it just picks up on what the discussion was just before. We follow the science. We look through the information that's provided. We understand the way the vaccine is manufactured, the components that go into making the vaccine, how it's made, the quality measures, what's used to make sure it is what it says it is, that it's pure, it just is not containing anything strange inside the vaccine. We take a tremendous amount of pride in doing that, and we've done that for more than 100 years, having existed even before the FDA existed. Our center goes back to the Biologics Control Act of 1902. So we've been regulating vaccines for a while. So we make sure that the vaccines are made well. Then we look at the data on how well the vaccines work, how safe they are, and we make sure that there are plans in place to monitor if there are any problems that are going to come up with the vaccines in the future. And at the end of the day, that's done by a team of scientists that's a diverse group of people that brings a lot of different expertise to this, and usually involves dozens and dozens of people, and they come together to put together an integrated review. At the end of the day, the one thing that really joins them all together in doing that is that they think of it the same way. They don't want to approve anything that they wouldn't want to put in their own arms. And so that's how we go about this. We follow the science, and we make sure that the data support the decisions we make.
Well, thank you, Dr. Marks. Going on to our next question. Were there African-American scientists involved in the approval process? And what about sufficient numbers of African-Americans actually being included in the clinical trials to make meaningful recommendations?
Yeah, so I'm very happy to say that we have a very diverse center that is at FDA. There were indeed African-American and other minorities that were involved, underrepresented minority people who were involved in this. We have a diverse group that works on vaccines, and that's important because everyone brings a different perspective to this. In terms of the clinical trials for the two vaccines that are now under emergency use authorization, the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, both of those had just under 10%, 9.8 for one, I think 9.7 for the other, close to 10% people who categorize themselves as Black or African American. So a reasonable number, kind of consistent with the population, which was very important because of the disproportionate way that the Black African American community has been adversely affected by COVID-19.
Let me go on and ask questions about three special populations. Women who are pregnant, individuals who are immunocompromised, and what about children? What about very young children, infants? Should they all get vaccinated?
Right. So let me take them one at a time. So, and actually, the immunocompromised and the pregnant women are ones that are actually kind of similar right now. For pregnant women, we had some pregnant women in the trials, but not enough to make a definitive statement. That said, the way we have put forward for providers the information on this is that every provider that wants to consider administering a vaccine to a pregnant woman should have a discussion of the benefits and risks, because the risks of COVID-19 to a pregnancy are pretty significant. So there's no issue with vaccinating pregnant women with these vaccines theoretically. And in fact, I can tell you that hundreds of pregnant individuals have decided to get vaccinated. Those were at least several hundred healthcare workers who were pregnant decided to get vaccinated, as well as additional people. So pregnant women, it's a discussion with your healthcare provider about the benefits and risks. And the same really goes for immunocompromised people, where there, the issue is that we're not quite sure how good an immune response a person with immunocompromised will make. And it's probably different because not all immunocompromised people are immunocompromised to the same extent. Nonetheless, the benefits of getting the vaccine may certainly outweigh the risks. And for children, this is a challenge for us. We still don't have data on individuals younger than 16 years of age. We're right now seeing studies that are getting started to look at adolescents, and then after that, there'll be studies in younger children. So right now, we're in a place where we can't recommend giving these vaccines to children until we have the data. So that does mean that we still have to take the precautions with our children, but hopefully within the coming few months, we'll start to get those data and then be able to have vaccines that we can give to children.
So here's a question that's come in from our audience. What are your thoughts about the role of vitamin D in preventing or treating COVID-19?
So I'm not an expert in this area, but I would say that we don't have any great evidence that that's an effective treatment for this. Probably what I could say is a good, healthy, if it's vitamin D supplementation in the context of a healthy lifestyle where you're getting enough sleep, getting enough to eat, and taking good care of yourself, and taking social distancing, mask wearing, hand washing precautions, that is probably fine. But it's there are not that many treatments that we know for a fact work. We know that there are some monoclonal antibodies. Those are antibodies against a specific molecule those can be effective. We know that there are a few others that seem to be promising, and we know that convalescent plasma may have some benefit. But there's not a tremendous amount that it's not like that I can say to you that we feel confident in the vitamin world that is going to help.
Well, let me ask one last question, Dr. Marks, and this is a big one. It comes from an audience member. I am worried about anaphylaxis because I am allergic to shellfish and have seasonal allergies. Should I get vaccinated?
That is a fantastic question. That is one where when you go to get vaccinated or you go to the provider considering vaccination, you should tell them about that shellfish allergy. Shellfish allergies are not a reason not to get vaccinated. It's why, though, we have all of the providers that are giving the vaccine right now are prepared to deal with allergic reactions. And you should tell them so that they might take a little bit more precaution, but having a shellfish allergy is not a reason to not get vaccinated. It's a reason for the provider to know about it so they can probably watch you. The Centers for Disease Control would say they'll watch you instead of just 15 minutes. They'll watch you a half an hour in the office. But it's not something that would prevent you from getting vaccinated. Right now, the only things that would prevent you from getting vaccinated is if you had a known allergy to one of the things that are in the vaccines, or if you'd had an allergy to a bad allergic reaction to the first shot.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Marks, and we will now turn things back over to Dr. Reed Tuckson.
Well, thank you also very much, David, Dr. Carlisle, Dr. Corbett, and Dr. Marks. Dr. Marks, you've always been with us for every show, and we appreciate you again today. A big issue that is in front of all of us now is now that we have these vaccines, is how will they be distributed? We have the two people who have the most prominent roles, perhaps of all, in getting this done. Let me introduce first Major General Christopher Sharpston, Deputy Director for Supply, Production, and Distribution for the Operation Warp Speed, and Dr. Nancy Messonnier, the Director of the Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases at CDC, who leads the vaccine task force for the COVID-19 response. You both know that there has been some concern about the speed of the vaccine rollout. Many in our audience are expressing confusion about the process from vaccine production to getting needles in the arm. Can you please briefly explain the chain of events for us? And let's begin with you, Major General.
Reed, thanks very much. I do appreciate being invited to speak at this forum. You know, it is a whole of America approach the way that we're going after this. Operation Warp Speed is a public-private partnership. Our intent is to ensure that we can leverage not only the expertise of what exists within Health and Human Services, NIH, CDC in particular, and Dr. Messonnier will talk about that, but also the power that private industry brings to the capability in delivering a vaccine. So what we're doing is we're leveraging companies, pharmaceutical companies, pharmacies, hospitals, the places that deal with vaccines routinely every year are the same private industry companies in academia that we're using for this approach. Operation Warp Speed does remain 100% committed to the fair and equitable distribution of every vaccine dose that's available. And just so you're aware of the current numbers that we have out there, we currently have 48 million doses allocated out to the various jurisdictions, states, and territories. And we have distributed over 22 million doses with millions in transit over these next 2 days. And according to the CDC website, which Dr. Messonnier can address, right now we're tracking over 5.3 million doses have been administered into the arms of Americans. I'll pause there and kind of keep my my answers very simple at this point in time and go into more depth as we go further.
Good. Dr. Messonnier, would you carry the story forward from Operation Warp Speed, now moving on to how the CDC's role takes over?
So CDC works closely with Operation Warp Speed and the rest of the federal government. But importantly, CDC also works with every state and local jurisdiction, every partner, every community. The way that we're going to accomplish ending this pandemic through use of vaccine is having everybody on board working together. And that's why I'm so thankful to be here with you today. Your communities have been incredibly hard hit during the pandemic. And our mission to end this pandemic is going to take you. We can't succeed without you. We need everybody on board working together now in the future. And with this vaccine and all of us working together, I think Major General Sharpston and I are really confident that we can end this pandemic.
Great. So as we start to think about it, I would like you, Dr. Messonnier, and by the way, thank you again for being on every show that we have produced and the many town halls, and you are a stalwart of what we try to bring to the public. What we're seeing is so much variability state by state. And so I think it's one of the things that our audience needs to try to understand is how do you solve for the problem of working with 50 different states that each have their own mechanisms for connecting with the federal government?
Yeah, I'll start by saying that actually the numbers as of tonight are closer to almost 6 million people have now started their vaccination journey. That means 6 million people are now beginning to get protected against this virus who weren't a month ago. And I actually think we should celebrate that number as being remarkable. We're working with every state and jurisdiction to move as quickly as possible to make vaccine available to everybody. But do remember that these vaccines are slightly complicated. They're vaccines that providers haven't used before, and they're a little bit complicated in terms of storage and handling the conditions of the cold chain. And so many jurisdictions thought that, especially because we were launching this campaign over the holidays, they wanted to start slowly the initial weeks of this just to get some momentum coming. I really think that things are going to start moving much more quickly now. And, I know folks are anxious to get to the vaccine. I think waiting your turn is hard. I can say that I'm still waiting my turn to get vaccinated. I hope that your audience will use this time to get educated about the vaccine and to help educate the community so that when it is your turn, you'll be ready and able to just roll up your sleeve and get vaccinated.
Great. And Major General Sharpson, what do you see then as the production schedule? When will we have enough vaccine for all Americans? And when will we be able to get out of this challenge of having to allocate, to make triage decisions as to which populations are priority populations that should get it before others?
Yeah, Reed, and as you lay out in your question, it really is a problem of supply versus demand. In the beginning, we do know that there's not going to be enough vaccine product available for every American that's out there. So to provide 330 million doses, up to 660 million doses if it's a 2-dose regimen, to all of America, it takes a long time for the production to ramp up to support that. Initially, we're assessing that we can get between 15 and 20 million doses produced by each Pfizer and Moderna each month going forward. There is a potential to ramp up production as they refine their manufacturing processes. But until we can bring additional vaccines online with future EUAs, right now that's kind of the pace that we're going to be going at. So we work very closely with the jurisdictions, as Dr. Messonnier mentioned, to really enable and assist their plans in vaccinating Americans. If we follow the ACIP recommendations, we're going to go after healthcare workers.
Explain what the ACIP is.
The Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices is a external CDC group that advises the CDC director on which vaccine should be used with which populations. And Reed, I know you're just challenging my my knowledge base. I'm learning very quickly. Dr. Messonnier schools me up every day, and that was one of the first things I learned from her. Was how
the point is that one of the questions from our audience has been, please make sure that our speakers explain things in ways that the lay people can understand. You're doing a great job, Chris. Keep going, man.
Thanks very much. And so what we're trying to do is clearly we're going to follow the ACIP recommendations first, healthcare workers, and then getting after the people in the long-term care facilities as part of our 1A population. For healthcare workers across the United States, we're talking about 21 to 23 million Americans. Looking at what vaccines are available right now, we believe it'll take upwards of a month to ensure that all of those people are addressed. And then as we start looking at the populations that are in long-term care facilities, that's about another 20 million. After that, we're going to get after essential workers and then on down the line with the special population groups. It's not our intent, and I don't believe it's any jurisdiction's intent, to approach these populations sequentially, one after another. I believe the best thing they can do is approach all of them in priority sequence, but generally getting after them in parallel as much as possible. So for the vast majority of Americans, as Dr. Fauci has mentioned, we do believe that by June or April, May, June, we'll be getting after the vast amount of Americans that exist in the general population.
Thank you. Dr. Messonnier, we have a couple of quick questions that we want to ask you, really rifle shot here in terms of what our audience is asking for. Number one is, how long will immunity last, and how many times do we have to get vaccinated?
Boy, that's a great question. And sort of as you heard from several of the previous speakers, we have to follow the science. The science right now doesn't tell us. That's why we're going to be following people who get vaccinated for the long term, basically to see if at some point immunity runs out. I think it's possible, and most scientists think that at some point we may have to give some segment of the population booster shots, but really we just don't know that for sure yet. So let's focus on the endeavor right in front of us, which is getting that initial series into everybody.
And we also have a question about side effects. And can you explain side effects and versus what is a side effect versus what the vaccine is supposed to be doing to your body?
Yeah, I guess I would call a side effect something unintended that happens with the vaccine. The point of the vaccine is to stimulate your immune system so that you're ready to respond if you're again exposed to the virus. Side effects can actually have a broad definition. So frankly, if you get vaccinated and your arm is sore, that counts as a side effect. And we expect some of those side effects. In the clinical trials, some people did have sore arm and fatigue. Some people even had fever. And this was a little bit worse after the second dose than the first dose. But most of these side effects were mild, lasted only a day or two. But as you heard from Dr. Marks, we have found in some of these patients an unanticipated higher risk of severe allergic reactions or anaphylaxis. That's also a side effect. Now, it's not something that we would ever hope for, but the good news is that these severe allergic reactions are treatable, and we're ensuring that there are appropriate measures at the vaccination sites so that if patients do suffer from an allergic reaction, they can be quickly treated.
Well, thank you both very much for being with us today. And we're going to move our discussion, but maybe and Major General Sharpson, thank you so much. And Nancy, if you could stick around for just a minute, we're going to move to the next segment of that story. We went from the vaccine dissemination from the federal level, now down to the state, and now we want to move down to the community and local level. And to help us with that conversation, let me introduce Dr. Leon McDougall, who is the president of the National Medical Association. Dr. McDougall.
Thank you, Reed. I'd like to welcome Dr. Helene Gale. Dr. Gale, you are the CEO of the Chicago Community Trust and co-director of the prestigious National Academies of Medicine, the special committee charged with making recommendations on a framework for equitable allocation of COVID-19 vaccines. So to start, could you tell us about your work with the committee, and then perhaps speak to how work of equity and fairness in the vaccine dissemination dealt with in the report that was produced?
Great, thanks, and I'm really honored and pleased to be here. And I will just add that Dr. Tuckson was one of our committee members as well, and really played an important role as we thought about this issue of developing a framework. And just to put it into context, people may know the National Academies is an independent body that does studies on issues of public health, medical, but also other scientific significance. And we were asked by, the committee was put together and the study was commissioned by the NIH and the CDC back in the middle of the summer before we even knew which vaccines would be available. And we were asked to develop a framework that really thought about equity at the heart of it, because we knew that the vaccine in the beginning, there would be, as was mentioned earlier, the demand would be greater than the supply. We had to think about equity, particularly given the disproportionate impact that this pandemic has had on communities of color. And so that was a major part of our charge. And we really looked at how do we think about the populations that are most impacted, the populations that are at greatest risk, and how do we think about a framework that puts those risks together in a way that developed the framework that then was the foundation for the ACIP, the committee that we talked about in the last segment, that advises the CDC once a vaccine has actually been authorized for use. And so this framework served as the foundation for further policy recommendations about how this vaccine would be rolled out, who were the priority populations that would first get the vaccine, and really looked at going from the highest risk, both of the health consequences as well as the societal consequences, and then on down the line, so we could have a framework that thought about equity from the very beginning.
Oh, excellent. Are there applications that local advocates for fairness and equity can use as they monitor the dissemination process in their local communities?
Well, you know, one of the things that we looked at as we put together these frameworks, and it was a big discussion, you know, while we recognized that communities of colors had been most hard hit and disproportionately impacted, we recognized that it wasn't race itself or ethnicity that put people at risk, but it was really the impact of race, or if you will, racism, and how it rolls out and how it affects people's health, their liveliness, and the economic toll that it was taken. Why do people of color, why are they at greater risk? Well, it's because of the jobs that people work. It's the ability to work from home or not work from home. It's the homes people live in. And we took all of those factors into consideration as we developed this framework. So, you know, putting a priority on communities that had been most hard hit, who had these kind of social vulnerabilities, as well as some of the health vulnerabilities, some of the diseases that put people at risk for worse outcomes. So all of those are the factors that now need to be thought about as this rolls out. How are we actually prioritizing those communities that have been the most hard hit? And equally of real importance, how are we getting the message out? Making sure that we have messages that are relevant to the diverse communities, but also that the messengers that are delivering the message are messengers that people trust. We know that we have a long-standing legacy of mistrust between communities of color and our health system. So we want to make sure that we are building that kind of trust as this vaccine rolls out, and that we have the right messages and we have the right messengers.
Thank you. So how can our audience obtain a copy of this report?
Well, people can go on the website, and it's National Academies of Science, and the report is widely available, publicly available. You can download it, and it gives all the ways in which we looked at these different issues, and again, with a real focus on equity at the heart of it.
Well, thank you very much. And there's a scrolling bar across the bottom of our screen here too, so that's another way to access the.
That's great, because it doesn't just roll off my tongue. Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
So our next guest will be Mark Morial.
Hey, how are you?
Oh, all right.
Greetings. Hey, Dr. Reed. Hey, Dr. Leon. My pleasure.
Yes.
Great to be with both of you all. I hope you can see me.
Yes.
I've been on so many Zooms today that I want to make sure it's working right. But thank you all for the collaboration and the support.
Looks good. So you are the president and CEO of the National Urban League. And I know that you have some real concerns about fairness and equity in vaccine dissemination. What are those concerns?
Thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure to work with many of you on this issue. And I'll be right to the point. I believe strongly that the current method of distributing vaccines, which relies heavily on hospitals and chain pharmacies, is insufficient to get the job done. What is needed is a much broader distribution effort. That distribution effort should include schools, it should include libraries, it should include community sites, universities. I noticed down in Miami, something I applaud, they're using the Hard Rock Stadium as a 24-hour site. There has to be more effort to get beyond chain pharmacies and hospitals. And let me give you some numbers. The top 25 chain pharmacies in the United States have about 38,000 pharmacies. If they were to vaccinate some 300 million people, each of them would have to give the vaccine to nearly 9,000 people twice. This is logistically not possible. And I think down the road, as the vaccine, the intent becomes to administer the vaccine to the broad population, Unless there's a broad-based system, you're going to have frustration. You're going to have the indignity of long lines. You're going to have community confusion across the board. So I'm hopeful and will be urging with as much vigor and force as I can muster that the incoming administration make fast and radical changes to the distribution plan. The states and the counties and the cities should be mandated to create plans that are reasonable in terms of their ability to vaccinate the population in that county or in that city. The testing regime that the outgoing administration undertook was insufficient to quickly ramp up testing or to allow for testing to be available without confusion and without long lines to those that wanted it. We have got to use common sense and logistical data in order for this to do well. I'll repeat, 38,000 pharmacies in the United States, the top 25 pharmacy groups, would each have to administer, if you're talking about the Pfizer vaccine, almost 9,000 people would have to receive 2 doses, so they each have to administer 18,000 doses. Let's just use common sense. That's not possible. Of the 38,000 pharmacies, a high number are in the state of California. Some communities have insufficient number of pharmacies. So we've got to broaden this out, and clearly community-based sites, schools, libraries can't administer. You'll need doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners, physicians, assistants to do it. But we need a different approach. And then number 2, very critically, there is a lot of misinformation and lack of information about the vaccine, about the process used to develop the vaccine, about the process generally used to develop medicines and therapies in the United States, and concerns about whether this was rushed or whether the, if you will, ghost of Tuskegee have attached themselves to this process. How do we confront that? We meet people where they are, but we have a broad engagement, public relations, advertising campaign to provide people with the information they need to create some transparency and some confidence.
So that's a good segue to our next question. So what do you envision as the role of community-based organizations in the dissemination process?
We, I think, can amplify messages from the right messengers. The right messengers are people like the 2 of you, African-American physicians, doctors, and scientists. I cannot ask people in the community to take medical recommendations from Mark Morial or from the National Urban League. But Mark Morial and the National Urban League and many others can assert that medical professionals that we respect in the Black community, from the Black medical schools, from the Black professional associations, have examined, looked at, reviewed this process, and have green-lit it. Or number 2, we have to encourage people to consult their own physician if they have problems. We've got to order the messaging correctly. We don't have the credibility to go out and start saying you should take the vaccine. That's not our role, and nor should it be our role. As I say to people, I'm a lawyer by trade. Don't take legal advice from your plumber. Don't take accounting advice from your electrician. But also don't take electrical advice from your plumber. We've got to help people make the right decision with the right information. And I'm confident that if people have the right information, if messengers, Black doctors, physicians, Latinx doctors, and physicians Asian American doctors and physicians, Native American, American Indian doctors and physicians are speaking to their communities with facts and data and clear explanations. Many of us can amplify that. I'm not going to encourage people to take medical advice from me or from Oprah or from Jay-Z or from LeBron. But all prominent people can be amplifiers of messages that have been advanced by those of you who know this, who understand this, who examine this, and who we can trust would not say it's safe and effective if it was not safe and effective. And that's, I've said this to governors, mayors, the Biden administration's task force, the NIH, the CDC, and research, polling, and data backs this approach up. This is simple. Community-based distribution and a community conversation based with the right messengers, and we can advance this. I am speaking out loudly and forcefully because I fear chaos and confusion. If this is not done in the right way, this is a massive undertaking.
Well, Mark, this is there. This is perfect, Mark. And what you know is that coming later in this program will be the people from the Biden-Harris team, whom I know you've been meeting with regularly. And I want our audience to understand that advocates like you and all of us at the Black Coalition Against COVID are working hand in glove to try to work that community partnership out. Mark, thank you so much. Dr. McDougall, thank you so much.
Leon, thank you very much. Appreciate both of you all's leadership.
And thank you for what the Urban League is doing in this regard. Let me now turn to the next part of our program as we start to look at the issues for the socioeconomics of this pandemic and the elements that are affecting our community, as so many of our community are suffering. And to bring that conversation forward is Dr. Martha Dawson, the president of the National Black Nurses Association and one of the key members of our coalition. Dr. Dawson. Dr. Dawson, are you there? All right. Since we don't see Dr. Dawson, let me introduce Dr. Felicia Collins. Dr. Collins, are you in the queue? Thank you very much. Dr. Collins, you are the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Minority Health at HHS. And we have a question from the audience about why African Americans seem to be suffering so much more from the COVID pandemic. Is there something about us that makes us more susceptible to this pandemic, or are there other factors involved?
So good evening, Dr. Tuckson, and good evening, everyone. And it really is a pleasure to join you today. And it's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues from across the Department of Health and Human Services. The Office of Minority Health works in partnership with each of the agencies and offices represented today on COVID-19 and a variety of other issues. And you are right that Black Americans are suffering as we are more likely to test positive for COVID-19, more likely to be hospitalized, and more likely to die from COVID-19 compared to non-Hispanic whites. And while COVID indeed has shined a bright light on health disparities in the US, unfortunately, these disparities that we're seeing are really analogous to what existed before COVID-19. So these differences in health outcomes or health disparities reflect the conditions in which we live, and the public health term we use for this is called social determinants of health. And so the social determinants of health include things like whether we have access to health care and the quality of our health care, but there are a whole lot of other things that are included, such as our housing and the transportation that we use and access to education and job opportunities, just to name a few. So if we put this social determinants of health concept into context about COVID, we as Black Americans are more likely to become infected with COVID because, for example, we disproportionately are essential workers. And so we're working in long-term care facilities or grocery stores, or we're driving the trains and the buses, and we can't work from home. Or another example related to our housing is that we're more likely to have multiple generations in one home, which is the case for my family. And it's happened twice in my extended family that the essential worker unfortunately became infected with COVID and brought it home, and then grandma became infected and later passed away. And then to make the matters worse, we as Black Americans are more likely to have conditions that put us at an increased risk of severe illness if we get infected by COVID. And I'm talking about things such as chronic kidney disease and sickle cell disease and diabetes and obesity, again, just to name a few. So there are a lot of factors that are stacked up against us as African Americans, increasing our risk for COVID infection, hospitalization, and death. And that makes it even more important that we have accurate information about COVID-19 and the related vaccines. From a professional perspective and from a personal perspective, as someone who's had a close family member hospitalized with COVID pneumonia and who has lost multiple extended family members and close family friends to COVID, the risk of COVID infection and its consequences far outweigh not being able to gather in person with my extended family or my church family, and it outweighs the risk of getting the vaccine. So
I'm so glad you really focused on that, Dr. Collins, because the two things you said I want to make sure we don't lose in this. Number one is how many of our people are on the front lines, and it infuriates me when I see Americans, and oftentimes, white Americans, who seem to have some crazy political notion that not wearing a mask is somehow a political statement that makes it possible for them to justify infecting or killing someone else, when we're the ones on the front lines driving the buses. We're the ones that are in the grocery stores being the check-in people. They are endangering our lives with their silly nonsense. And I'm so glad that you have been able to say that. I particularly am worried about something else that you said, though. And that is that as we are trying to quarantine when we have to, and when they make us when we have to go through these periods where we have to know that if we've been infected, we've got to stay at home and be away from others. The multi-generational families living in one home with only one bathroom makes it harder for us. But I think what this means is that we also find people who are having trouble with food insecurity and other kinds of problems. This seems to me, Dr. Collins, and I wonder what you think, a time for the Black community-based organizations to come together and help fill some of these gaps.
So absolutely. I think there is a big role for community-based organizations in helping to deal with social determinants of health in general and the COVID pandemic in particular. Black community-based organizations are trusted messengers who are critical for disseminating accurate information in ways that allow us to make informed decisions. And in the case of COVID, those decisions are the ones that are going to help us get back to in-person activities with our extended family, our church family, and all the other activities we've had to put on hold. And I know, again, if talking about COVID, I know many of us, myself included, get COVID fatigue. And therefore, we really need our community-based organizations to encourage us to recommit to the public health measures, which I know everyone has heard, but I'm going to say it again, to wear our masks, to watch our distance, to avoid gatherings, and to wash our hands frequently, because these are really critical to keep ourselves and our community safe from COVID. I'm also going to note that one thing that sometimes I don't think communities know is that there are so many individuals within the federal government, within states, within communities, professional and advocacy organizations who have really worked hard to advocate Black Americans to not be at the end of the line when it comes to COVID vaccination. And the fact is that there are other people waiting to take our spots in the line, and they are willing to take the vaccination if we say no thank you to when the vaccine is offered. Therefore, I think community-based organizations also play a tremendous role in carrying these and other messages, addressing the lack of information and addressing misinformation within our Black communities to ensure that we are not at the end of the line when it comes to COVID vaccination.
I see my colleague, Dr. Dawson, is here, and she's going to query our next guest, Reverend Butts, in just a moment. But as you close out, Dr. Collins, let me just ask you one last question. What can we expect from the HHS in being supportive of our Black, you've got this whole audience now filled with Black community social organizations and activists, people that are the lifeblood of the Black community. They are expecting their government to partner with them. What is HHS going to be able to do to help support our community-based organizations?
So let me just say that we are convinced at the Office of Minority Health that engaging trusted community voices is a critical strategy for the dissemination of accurate information about COVID, about social determinants of health within Black communities across the nation. And I really believe that each and every organization represented on this call and each individual is such a trusted messenger. And thus we welcome opportunities to partner with you, to make sure you have accurate information about COVID-19 that you can share with your families and the communities and the constituencies you serve. We already are engaging trusted community voices through a cooperative agreement with Morehouse School of Medicine. And so they are helping us disseminate culturally appropriate messages to states and territories and tribes. And they're helping us link highly impacted communities to testing, vaccination, and other healthcare services. There also are opportunities we want to take the opportunity to be a resource of COVID information and to link you to the COVID health equity information from the NIH and CDC and FDA and other agencies when you just come to our website. So our website is minorityhealth.hhs.gov. And in closing, I just want to say I'm a really firm believer in the power of information. And we are committed at the Office of Minority Health to providing our Black communities with accurate information about COVID-19 in general, vaccines, and so much more. Because each of us have to share that power of information with our families and communities, and then we're going to collectively defeat COVID-19.
Well, thank you very, very much. And I want to guarantee you one thing for sure, though, is that we wanted you on the show. We wanted to meet you. We wanted all of the Black community organizations to meet you because we're going to be following up with you. And we're going to be knocking on your door, and we're going to have some more conversations. And I know you welcome that. But we've got to have a partnership where we can move this forward. So thank you so much, Dr. Collins. And now let me turn to the president of the National Black Nurses Association, Dr. Martha Dawson, to interview a very important member of the Black community.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Dr. Reed Tuckson, for inviting me tonight. And I have the honor of speaking to Reverend Kevin Butts. He is the pastor of the nationally renowned Presbyterian Baptist Church in the city of New York that has a very rich history. His organization is extremely large, and he have the opportunity to combine both the spiritual aspect as well as leadership, activism, and community services. And he is also one of the co-conveners of the Choose Healthy Life Black Clergy Action Plan. And so we are delighted to have you here tonight, Reverend Buck.
Thank you, Dr. Dawson, and thank you and all of your nurses.
I've
been to the hospital several times.
And thank you for recognizing that. I appreciate it.
They take good care of me.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. And you take good care of us as well, because we need that spiritual aspect. But our first question for you is, I would like for you to tell us about the initiative that you have going on and how you see the role of churches in responding to this crisis. You know, the Black community, we're very spiritual. And so just tell us a little bit about the initiative that you have going and how churches should be responding at this time.
Thank you very much. We can't separate the sacred from the secular. We are very spiritual, but we are very practical. And we believe, and I've said this over the last 30 years, I may have coined it, that good religion goes best with some common sense. So we're following the science. Our initiative began really with a woman named Deborah Fraser Howes as we responded to the pandemic we know as HIV/AIDS. And we had to make several major changes, not only in the way our churches and our ministers approach this dreaded disease, but also in terms of how we gave information to our community. Our organization is based on scripture, Deuteronomy 30:19. You know, I put before you life and death and encourage you, choose life. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to save lives. Our community has been the one that's been least informed, often left out, and of course manipulated. And we believe now, based on our success with HIV/AIDS, that our pattern, which really means bringing together the clergy with the scientists and the doctors and the community-based organizations, that we can get the information out. We can be the mouthpiece. We can be the advocates. And people trust us. The church is still the place of social cohesion for our community. I don't care what anybody says, it is true. And the Black pastor is still the most trusted of all. And we have every reason to believe that's true, not only in terms of medicine, but also in terms of the political life that sets the atmosphere. We just had one Black pastor elected to the Senate. We had one Black pastor who is still the major Black political leader of all times, Adam Clayton Powell Jr. We have Henry McNeil Turner, who was an AME bishop down in Georgia, who was very powerful, and Bill Gray out of Philadelphia. So we have in our possession the keys to unlock the doors for information to our community. Now, on this call, and I thank you, Reed Tuckson, you know I do, we have thousands of people from the fraternities, the sororities, the doctors, oh, I love you, nurses, the nurses, who can help us, and they are in our churches. And our people don't have time to, and I thank Dr. Corbett, the brilliant scientist that we had on earlier. But our people don't have time. They've got to, you know, clean their houses, raise their children. They have to do all kinds of, go to work. They need us to interpret for them the science. And thank God, through sessions like this, I can't break down the specific science, but I can say that based on the scientists I know, based on the ones who have talked to us, this vaccine is safe. You should take advantage of getting it. Our churches, if possible, should become vaccination centers. And our ministers should demonstrate our belief in our scientists, doctors, nurses, and say, we will be among the first to take the test, take the vaccine, so that you will feel more comfortable. We partner with
we really appreciate that.
So I keep talking, you know, I'm a preacher. So
that's right, but that's good because I appreciate what I'm hearing, especially about connecting HIV and AIDS to this current pandemic. Because again, that was something strange and new, but we've been able to manage it, and we can do the same thing with logic and information, as you said. And especially, we have to have everyone involved, especially our churches, to help us to dismantle the misinformation and the disinformation that is out there. That is so important. So having said that, what can the Black community do? And what should we do to be of assistance to those of us who are struggling and in need? And I know you're out there in the community, and you're seeing this probably at the ground level.
We, in our community, first, you're right, get the information to the people, but then respond to the needs. We can be advocates in terms of making sure that our people who are usually underpaid and suffering from some of the terrible conditions that exist receive the equitable share of support from government, whether it's federal, state, or local. Two, we can make sure that people get fed. You know, we're Matthew 25 kind of people. You know, I saw you hungry, and we can respond to many of the social needs. You're absolutely right. You know, there are times when, because of who the pastor is, the pastor may be able to get into somewhere to see somebody who's sick and the family's just going crazy. They haven't seen him, they don't know. And then we have to respond to death in ways that are not culturally appropriate. You know, we can't even gather. You know, we can communicate through these mediums or this media this way. But when it comes to having your funeral service via Zoom, it's happened, it works. But it's very uncomfortable and very disconcerting to the family. So the church, which is usually the first line of defense, gathers information from sessions like this, listens to doctors that we know and trust. We have many in our congregation, and they are on the side of getting this vaccine because they've seen firsthand. We have a pharmacist in our conversation who has responsibility for 3 hospitals. And she has been on the front line. And she says, I see what this virus can do. And then I think of the Black scientists and doctors who have been just enormously beneficial to our community. You know, Henry Hale Williams, the first open heart surgeon.
Dr. Henry Hale Williams.
Thank you, Reed. Henry Hale Williams, you know. I think of George Washington Carver, who saved the economy of the South. You know, I think of Charles Drew. And now we have men and women who are well-trained. 3 medical schools here, Morehouse, Meharry, Howard, you know. They are giving us this information. And we must interpret it for our people and say, this vaccine is safe. We must take it. We must save our lives. And our medical professionals, our political leaders, our community-based organizations. And I think because we are the church, we will have great success the same way we did when we confronted the HIV/AIDS epidemic.
Terrific.
Or pandemic.
Thank you so much, Reverend Butts. And by the way, Daniel Hale Williams. I had to go back to my memory for a minute. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
And we have a number of Black clergy organizations and faith-based, and you represent that community so well. Dr. Dawson, thank you very much. And of course, you know that we have our hats off to all of the people who are in your organization, those legions of Black nurses on the front lines fighting for us every day. Well, as we close out our show with the last segment, I think it is very important that we move our way through now to the people that will be responsible for leading the effort going forward from the Biden-Harris team. And we are very blessed to have the two of the top leaders of our new administration who are with us tonight, who will share how they feel, how they think, and what they are going to do with us. And let me start that conversation by introducing our great and important colleague. Is she on there? And we hope so. But Dr. Valerie Montgomery Rice is the president of the Morehouse College of Medicine in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Valerie Montgomery Rice.
Good evening, and I am very excited to be here from Morehouse School of Medicine. And I know
I'm sorry, Valerie, I apologize.
All these years, that's okay. That is okay. And let me bring to the screen, because I know we have been listening to great words from everyone. We really do want to hear from Dr. Nunez-Smith. Dr. Marcella Nunez-Smith is joining us, and Dr. Vivek Murthy, is he there? All righty. Haven't seen you in a while. Nice to see you all. Thank you for your patience. So let me introduce these 2 very important people. Dr. Marcella Nunez-Smith is the chair of the Biden-Harris Health Equity Task Force and the co-chair of the Biden-Harris COVID-19 Advisory Board. And Dr. Vivek Murthy is the former and about to be, once again, I hope, our U.S. Surgeon General. But this time he's going to have a broader portfolio, as we hear. And so we look forward to the work that they are both going to be doing to help us mitigate this virus. And I know we're short on time, but I think that it is very important that this community of over 3,000 people who are online, who are asking lots of different questions, hear from you. Because as you all know, a great many of our audience are concerned with the trustworthiness of government institutions. And as the 2 of you who are, I believe, very influential members of the incoming Biden-Harris team, I would like to first give you the opportunity to say something. What would you say to Black America? And what can we expect from this administration going forward? And I'll start with you, Dr. Nunez-Smith, please.
Yes, of course. Thank you. And good evening to everybody. Thank you so much for inviting us to be part of this conversation. And, special thank you to you, Dr. Montgomery Rice, for your leadership, especially now. Your question is spot on, right? As President-elect Biden has said, we know Black Americans and other people of color really have not always been treated with the dignity and honesty they deserve by their government and the scientific community. And these institutions have actively earned this trust. The incoming administration knows this and is going to prioritize rebuilding trust. The president-elect has said and is committed to honesty and transparency. You know, we're looking at an incoming administration that reflects the diversity of America. And I want to just assure everyone that centering on equity is a shared value across the entire administration. Now, as you mentioned, I will be chairing, it's an honor to do so, the COVID-19 Health Equity Task Force. And, you know, our work is there before us, but we will generate strategies and recommendations really to ensure that there is fairness in the response to the recovery moving forward. We know partnerships will be key to the success, and have such respect for the work of the coalition and everybody who's on now. You know, a core aspect of rebuilding that trust is going to be for us to listen and to respond to what we hear, to recognize the expertise that comes with lived experience. So we have work to do to rebuild that trust, but we're ready. And I'll pause there and turn it over to Dr. Murphy.
Dr. Murphy, please, Vivek, please.
Well, thank you so much. And Dr. Montgomery Rice, Dr. Tuckson, it's so wonderful to be here with you. And Dr. Montgomery Rice, I know we haven't seen each other in a little while, but I have fond memories of my visits to Morehouse back when David Satcher had invited me down. It's good to see you again. You know, Leslie, just also say it's such a privilege to be able to work in the Biden administration, if I'm confirmed by the Senate, with Dr. Marcela Nunez-Smith. I have known her for many years, have admired her work from afar, and we are really lucky as a country to have her leading the equity efforts around COVID. And I'm so glad President-elect Biden asked her to serve in that role. You know, the challenge of how to rebuild trust within the Black community, and even more broadly within communities of color, is a subject that has been, you know, under discussion, you know, with President-elect Biden for many, many months preceding the election. I've had the opportunity to brief him on COVID since March, since the pandemic began. And I will tell you that in many of those conversations, the issue of the disparities that we were seeing and who was getting COVID, who was dying from COVID, who was getting disproportionately less access to testing from COVID, these were the subjects of our conversations. And he said on many occasions, if we are privileged enough to be able to serve, if he is fortunate enough to be president, that he wants to do everything he can to address these disparities. But it starts with what you said, Dr. Montgomery Rice, which is how do we reestablish trust? And I don't think that you do it quickly, and I don't think it's done easily. I think it has to be demonstrated through action. Like, communities, I think, need to know that you're listening to them. They need to see that you're ready to deliver results to change how business is being done. Because we know the current healthcare system, the current way in which we operate, disadvantages communities of color, and it often has led to the disparities and outcomes that we see today. I also don't think we can just throw money at this problem, which is sort of a common strategy that's used, I would say, in Washington, D.C., because we know that even when a lot more money was put into clinical trials nearly 20 plus years ago, that it didn't make communities of color participate more in clinical trials. In fact, we saw that the lines actually went the other way, that we had greater participation of white Americans in trials, but it declined actually the proportion of Black Americans and Latino Americans participating in trials. So I think the way that we address this and the way we've been talking about it, during this transition, is to, number one, be upfront and honest with what we know and what we don't know, to show people the information we have and not over sell anything, whether it's a medication or a vaccine or our plan. The second thing that we've been talking about is the importance of showing up and listening, recognizing we still have a lot to learn about what people have experienced, about what they need in terms of not just the vaccine, but their healthcare overall. And I'd say the last thing I'll mention of the many we've talked about is the importance of changing our approach, as needed. And, partnership, as we've talked about it, is more than showing up and telling people what to do. It starts with listening, but it also means being flexible and able to to change course as needed. And our hope is that if we can be thoughtful about that, if we can show up for communities, if we can show a willingness to change and be honest again about the information we have, if we can not just speak, but actually create space for other people to speak, especially members of the community, nurses and doctors and health professionals from the community, that's how the message gets out. And our role is less to be in the front, in the front, so to speak. It's more to be in the back supporting. And that's why we're glad to be here. It's what we hope to do after January 20th.
So Dr. Nunez Smith, one of your titles is Chair of the Health Equity Task Force. So you and I both know, having been in this space a long time, what COVID did for us was really snatch the curtain down, right? And everybody could see behind the curtain now. And as my daughter would say, lots of people were woke. And we saw the health disparities that were secondary to socioeconomic challenges, lack of access, and the chronicity of barriers that have been put in place such that people who look like us, per se, have not been able to reach their fullest potential. So how do we continue to move towards health equity once we get everybody vaccinated and we get the virus, we start to mitigate the virus? We have infection rates that are around 2 to 3%. You know, we got 70% of people vaccinated. How do we make sure we don't go backwards?
Yeah, thank you for that. So, you know, we are here tonight to talk about vaccines, but we need to keep that future watch, right? So first of all, we have to make sure, as part of our conversation tonight, that there is easy access to vaccination. You know, we've talked about the social determinants of things like transportation. So we can't lose sight of that. We have to make sure that vaccination, you know, are free. Those are important considerations. But vaccination alone is not sufficient, and that's the point of the question. You know, specific to COVID-19, we have to make sure everyone has equal access to, you know, things like testing for COVID. We recognize that some people may need food, housing, or other supports to be able to quarantine or isolate. You know, as new treatments and therapies come online, we have to make sure there's equal access to that. All of that is part of our work. We have to make sure there's continued diverse representation in the clinical research. That's what Dr. Murthy just talked about. That leads to these life-saving breakthroughs like the vaccine. But, you know, the point of your question, you know, this is the critical one. We know that race and place too often in our country really determines access to resources and opportunities. After this past year, the entire country really has had a collective witnessing. We can't unsee what we've all seen this last year. It's going to be imperative for us, you know, to the point of your question, that we find ways to open up pathways to educational, economic opportunity as we move forward. That is how we get to equity on the other side of this pandemic. So the agenda that we're setting in the Biden-Harris administration, it's ambitious, but it's what the time calls for.
Thank you. And Dr. Murthy, part of your role, hopefully, as the Surgeon General will be to ensure that we understand the long-term consequences of this pandemic and the impact that this disease will have on people in public health perspective and a population health perspective. And I know it may be too early to tell if the vaccine has any long-term effects, but how will we monitor and how will we ensure that we are creating equity, as Dr. Nunez Smith said, as we continue to follow people 5, 10, 15 years from now, such that we are not going backwards when we look 20 years from now?
Well, it's a really good question. You know, we have a lot of experience with vaccines, but we also know that when you roll out a vaccine, that you don't just get FDA approval, put it out into the world, and then wash your hands and walk away. What you've really got to do is make sure that you are studying it closely to understand what people are experiencing, what kind of side effects are they having, how many people are having side effects. And that kind of what's called post-marketing surveillance, that's really essential. And we do that with other vaccines, and we absolutely need to make sure we do it here as well. But what also matters is what kind of data we are collecting. And we have to ensure that we are collecting data on race and ethnicity to make sure that we're not disproportionately tracking one part of the community and not understanding the impact of the vaccine on other parts of the community. This data piece, data, when you mention data, sometimes people think, you get out their blanket, their pillow, and it's time to go to sleep. It's a boring subject. But Marcel and I are people like us are actually quite interested in the data, because the data is what lets you see what's really going on. And the truth is that we have been flying blind for a long time without nearly the kind of data that we need to generate the kind of insights that would let us really target efforts and sometimes raise the flag to say, hey, there's a real problem here. One community is much, much more disproportionately affected than another. That's why the data really matters. To your broader question, though, if we really want to advance equity more broadly, not just in vaccine access or in surveillance, what we've got to do is we've got to measure it, got to know how we're doing. We've also got to commit to it at the highest level of government, from the White House, from the office of the president, which is what President-elect Biden is doing. We have to fund it and support it adequately, because doing that research and making sure that we're staying on track requires money, and we've got to follow through. For a long time, equity has been a buzzword, but I think we think of it as a value that should run through our policies, through how we operate, and that's kind of how we'll approach it. Suffice it to say, though, that none of this can happen if we're not working closely with communities in this process. Our intention is not to cook up a bunch of policies and programs in Washington, D.C. and then unleash them on the population. It's to build these hand in hand together with communities who understand what folks are going through, who are on the front lines, and who we are going to seek to learn from, in the months ahead.
Thank you. I am very pleased to see both of you in the seats and knowing that you are going to have our communities. And I say that very collectively, not just based on race, ethnicity, but socioeconomic and all of the challenges that we can turn into opportunities. So just remember that you have partners who can help you with this, and we stand ready to be with you in making sure that we can assist with everyone achieving their optimal level of health. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dr.
All right, so that's the end of the actual video, man. That was a good bill over an hour and some change. It's much needed and warranted for us to be able to handle our business and do what we need to do in order to advance our communities. And one of the ways we actually can do that is by continuing to fight for the hearts and minds of the people by presenting, the correct information, the right results, the actual data, the step-by-step process, using real research methodology, critiques, and understanding science, how it works. All of those things that we need to do in order for our people to be abreast to it. I know a lot of people tuned in, a lot of people dropped off. This stuff boring to them. It's not entertaining, engaging, and it's not encouraging. You know what I'm saying? It's not what they're used to. They're used to combativeness. They're used to argumentative things. And, we have to, I do agree with John when he say this, but people got to have a paradigm shift. Like at some point, when you come into consciousness and all of that stuff, some of that stuff is attracted to you, but you have to mature inside of consciousness. And, in this community, you have to mature. Like, what is maturity? What does it actually look like? And that's advancing knowledge. Like, if our ancestors required you to know and to do, that's what it required. It required you to know and to do. So why would you fight against something that, that you've always held personal and within? So I do like to appreciate everybody for tuning in, man. We're going to continue to build on it. You know what I'm saying? I decided to do this on a whim. This was something that I didn't want to do. I was like, you know what, man? Ain't nobody talking about this bill with all those Black doctors, with all those important people that was on one panel addressing the Black community. Nobody, no matter how many signs with Sean's I do, no matter how much we try to go and spread the correct information to our people, there was a panel that had over 200,000 views and should be in the millions. There's 40 million Black people, that nobody's really, really talking about or listening to. So I felt like bringing that about and, you know, making that build a part of the Martial Warrior Clan YouTube channel, but also accessible to our people, our community. And there was some things in there that you heard that I really wouldn't side with, but it was true. It was fair. You can't get around it. And that was, you know, later on when they brought on the pastor, you know, they do things like that when they have to. They reach out to the pastors because they know who control the minds and the hearts of the people in their communities. As sad as it to say, you know what I'm saying? If they could sell you on Jesus, they could sell you on this vaccine. But CK had asked me earlier about AstraZeneca, why the FDA rejected AstraZeneca's test results. Well, I'll tell you plainly, but I did send her the sources. I believe she's going to put that in the Discord. They didn't like the results. They didn't like the testing results at all. They actually, you know, they felt like some stuff was murky. They didn't like the way the trials were held. There was too many things that turned it off. So they were like, man, y'all got to come up with better testing, some better results, more substantial evidence, and then maybe you can get an EAU. However, I'm not really a fan of the AstraZeneca test, the viral vector. I am wholeheartedly a fan of the mRNA vaccine, Moderna. You know, if I got to get the Pfizer vaccine, I'll take that. But I really would like that Moderna, you know, more than anything. Not because the sister's involved in it, you know what I'm saying, but just based on the results and the extra additional things that they were actually looking at. Like, they provided just a little bit more data than Pfizer BioNTech. But we can expect to see more information from Pfizer and BioNTech. Not saying, you know, either one is not effective. They both are. 95% effectiveness. You can't beat that. Can't beat that. So look forward to more information. We're going to go, you know, maybe tomorrow, Science will shine if I get to do it. We're going to go backwards and deal with some information that I think that would be nice for you guys to hear. And deal with particular doctors and things of that nature. Man, that dude will never play that video, bro. I'm calling my phone right now, but so what I'm gonna do, man, is you know, again, appreciate it. Look, like the show, share the show. You know what I'm saying? And that's it for me. What up, Unc? Ladies and gentlemen, the books is in. The books are in. Yep. They're in. They're here.